Why is a charged Russian national ransomware affiliate walking free in the United States? We'll talk about it on this episode of Safe Mode.
Welcome to Safe Mode. I'm Greg Otto, editor-in-chief at Cyberscoop. Every week, we break down the most pressing security issues in technology, providing you the knowledge and the tools to stay ahead of the latest threats, while also taking you behind the scenes of the biggest stories in cybersecurity.
An attack is coming.
It's about keeping us safe.
He's just a disgruntled hacker.
She's a super hacker.
Stay alert.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.
This is Safe Mode.
Welcome to this episode of Safe Mode. I am your host, Greg Otto. On this week's interview segment, we're going to be talking with Cynthia Kaiser, the now SVP of Halcyon's Ransomware Center. Cynthia is a longtime FBI agent that worked in the cybercriminal division, and she's going to talk to us about what she's doing in the private sector now and what the ransomware landscape is like, but with an even greater look at what the ransomware landscape is like. Talking to Matt Capko, reporter for Cyberscoop. Matt had a really deep dive into a story that popped up on both of our radars after a DOJ announcement saying that they had seized a bunch of cryptocurrency from a ransomware affiliate. And we were like, we've never heard of this guy. What's his deal? And Matt, I guess you could say we got more than we bargained for. Take it away.
That's for sure. This was a wild one. And the more that I dug into it, it just seemed more weird. So yeah, this all started when the Justice Department, they announced that they seized almost $2.8 million in cryptocurrency, about $71,000 in cash, and 2 luxury vehicles from Yanis Antrophenko. He's a 36-year-old Russian national who is accused of deploying ransomware and extorting victims by email. This was from at least 2018 to 2022 while he was living in the United States. There was very little information in the Justice Department's announcement about his arrest, but he was arrested in California last year and charged for his alleged involvement in multiple ransomware attacks. Yet the wild thing was that he was released on bail the day of his arrest, continues to live in Southern California with few restrictions.
So, okay, as you know, you're listening, if you're not familiar with this case, you go, okay, he may be a Russian national, but I know enough about the U.S. legal system to go, okay, if you are charged with a crime, it's up to the courts to decide whether they want to hold you in jail until your trial or release you on bail, and you're free to live your life until your trial. Of course, that is the condition that you are an upstanding citizen and don't cause any more trouble until your court date, or you have a whole bunch more charges. And particularly with ransomware actors, you know, we see a lot of them, of course, being extradited in, and they're held in jail till their trial, obviously, because the extradition process is a very, very large undertaking for the Department of Justice. But we have a Russian national who is a ransomware affiliate right here in our relative backyard who is walking free. And Matt, why don't we fill everybody in case you haven't read the story? And if you haven't read the story, what are you doing? Go read the story. But for those that haven't read the story, what has Mr. Antrophenko been doing with his time since being arrested for his affiliation with the Zeppelin ransomware group?
Yeah, so he's violated conditions for his pretrial release at least 3 times in a 4-month period this year. This includes 2 arrests in California involving dangerous behavior while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Like you said, I mean, it's up to the courts to determine whether someone is remanded pending trial. But a bit of the backstory here is that it's just rare for a ransomware suspect to be arrested in the United States at all, and it's not completely unheard of for some to be released pending trial. It is pretty uncommon. So most ransomware operators are living in countries that aren't bound by extradition treaties with the United States. So it's just, there's a lot of irregularities with this case for sure.
And we're not the only one saying this. Like, don't get us wrong. Like, we're asking questions here, but this is not a crusade on Cyberscoop's part. Like, there were experts that have all varying relationships with law enforcement that when we spoke to them were like, what's going on here? Like, why is this guy walking free? Because this isn't just somebody that did this like once or twice. Like, this was a pretty expert, for lack of a better term, affiliate, right? Like, we're talking hundreds of ransomware incidents done with his fingers on the keyboard.
Yeah, they didn't get into specifics about how many were specifically linked to Antrophenko, but I mean, he definitely seemed to be a big player. They found 101 Bitcoin in cryptocurrency accounts that he controlled or owned. That's almost $11 million today. So he was busy. He was prolific. Yet the Justice Department granted him liberties that we just rarely see extended to such suspects. The prosecutors in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas, where he faces charges, did not flag him as a flight risk in this case. And that's another irregularity. Oftentimes ransomware suspects, it's the first thing that comes up. They're considered a flight risk and they're held pending trial.
So what did some of the experts that you talked to, like, what was their reaction to this specifically?
Yeah, so it was a mix. I talked to a lot of former FBI officials that are professionals in the cybersecurity space now. They were less shocked, less dismayed than the threat researcher folks, because they've seen this time and again. It's important to note that you are innocent until proven guilty in this country, and there's all kinds of reasons that courts make these decisions about whether somebody is allowed to walk free pending trial. The threat researchers I spoke to were just shocked. Wins are very difficult to come by in this space, and when we have that in our grasp, it just feels like this one slipping away a little bit. But former FBI officials, not shocked, more just trying to focus on the fact that the FBI is more focused on outcomes, right? Claiming the stolen funds and hopefully repaying some of the victims is a big deal, right? Versus just punishing one person. They also pointed out that even though Entropenko has violated conditions of his pretrial release, these aren't crimes involving ransomware. So there's no evidence that he is continuing to commit ransomware while he's out on bail.
Because I would say I don't think he's even been restricted from a computer. Do I have that wrong at all? Because that, I will say, is one thing that is usual no matter what level of cybercrime that we are talking about. That is usually a pretty common response to all these levels is, yeah, we should probably make sure that they're not using a computer. And if they are, we're going to give them a computer that is heavily monitored and you are like under the watchful eye of the U.S. government. I don't think that's the case with this, correct?
Yeah, it is correct. He is not banned from using the internet or computers. They are monitoring any devices he uses. Again, that's almost the first thing that you see in these court cases, that you're just restricted from using the internet. I know it's very difficult in today's day and age to live without the internet, but considering the internet was the conduit by which he committed all of these crimes, allegedly, it's a big deal.
Okay, so let's get to the one thing that we have not mentioned to make sure that we do not sound like naive little children here, is that why would the Justice Department and the police allow for all of this, which is something that I'm sure that former FBI agents and some threat researchers also went, this is probably what is happening here.
Yeah, so this is pure speculation, but a lot of indication that he might be assisting with investigations into other co-conspirators. It's one of the things that just came up quickly, and it perhaps makes the most sense why he's been given these liberties that are rarely given to ransomware suspects. So he could be helping them find others involved in Zeppelin ransomware, the money laundering that he's accused of, all sorts of paths to go down.
Never a dull moment in the cybercrime underground. Matt, really appreciate the story. Fantastic read. Go check it out on cyberscoop.com. And I'm sure as this case develops and more oddities unveil themselves in other ransomware cases, you'll be on top of it. So appreciate you hopping aboard.
Thanks so much for having me on, Greg.
Thank you. From one conversation about ransomware to another, to our interview segment this week with Cynthia Kaiser, the SVP of Halcyon's Ransomware Center. Talking with Cynthia, we talked out at Black Hat. Look, if you've been reading Cyberscoop, you know that Cynthia is a longtime FBI agent that worked in cybercrime at the Bureau. And now she's out in the private sector helping Halcyon tackle all the problems that ransomware causes enterprises. We talked to Cynthia about this new center that she is helping run at Halcyon, and also talked about the ransomware landscape right now, how we see actors really breaking into separate marketplaces, all of the subgenres in the marketplace, just the way that we see ransomware evolving in 2025, and how Cynthia and Halcyon are combating the changes. Check it out.
All right, and joining us this week on Safe Mode is a Cyberscoop 50 winner. Last year's Cyberscoop 50 winner during her time at the FBI, now in the private sector, doing all of the ransomware research that she was probably doing on the public sector, but doing it on the private sector side now. Cynthia Kaiser, SVP for Halcyon. Cynthia, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Halcyon has just launched a ransomware research center, which you oversee. Tell me about it. What are we doing here with this?
I'm so excited about the research center. And, as you noted, it is a little bit of a continuation of what I was doing at the FBI. But I think it's more than just taking the really good expertise that Halcyon has as ransomware experts and looking across industry and saying, like, how can we do more in terms of industry to industry collaboration, or in terms of association to industry collaboration, and really all work together for the benefit of ultimately that public-private partnership. That's a lot of buzzwords. So let me actually break it down to what that actually means to me. I really want to figure out a way so that we can unite experts and defenders in creating more authoritative ransomware research, information about ransomware. There's so much information across industry, and it doesn't necessarily have to be with the big companies. There's many different providers, startups, small and medium businesses that have a lot of valuable, almost niche information on ransomware. How do you bring it together? And I liken this to where we were at in the FBI in that 2017, 2018 time period when I came on board. If FBI had something they wanted to tell industry, they wrote an FBI product. If DHS had something, they wrote a DHS product. And it took, a lot of work and negotiations and collaboration to get to the joint cybersecurity advisories that you see today, that it seems crazy we would have done anything else.
Okay, right.
My vision is that we can do some of the same thing on the industry side, and knowing that, there's tension between competitive forces and collaborative forces. Right. But there's ways we can work together where if one entity has a certain information set that I wouldn't ever have, but I have certain information they wouldn't ever have, can we bring it together? Give us both credit at the top, but make it easier for net defenders. Make it easier for us to share back with the government. And that's kind of step one. Step two is really partnering with associations to identify what's the state of ransomware against the education sector, against state and locals, et cetera. And then step three is how do we bring it all together and then also advocate and drive some policy options, both at the national level, but I was also say at the state level, with some of the push coming now more towards the states with cybersecurity.
So on the association front, what exactly are you talking about, like the ISACs or ISAOs, or what other organizations are there out there that are non-governmental that you want to reach out to and work with?
Absolutely, the ISACs, but there's more. There's entities like the National Association of Secretaries of State, or various financial organizations that are out there that are nonprofits that help across their industry. I think there's a lot of different information sharing models that are working together too, in the background. But how can I then bring some of the great ransomware intelligence that we have here and help them at their sector level really understand what might be happening across all their organizations?
So with the Ransomware Research Center and the groups that you are actually researching, I'm wondering now in August 2025, what particularly are you seeing? I would say, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about the leaders in the ransomware space out there right now? And I use that word leaders for lack of a better term. I don't want to give them any sort of credence to any sort of positive general goodness. They're criminals. What are the leading criminals, I guess, doing out there right now?
What are the biggest mafias, right, in cybercrime? Yeah. So I think the ecosystem right now is weird because you had kind of coming into 2024, you had LockBit and Alfie, who were really had the giant market share. FBI, along with partners, does some law enforcement operations that either takes them down or creates kind of the situation in which it leads to their demise later in that year. Nothing's really come up that's taken that full, like that's filled that full vacuum
Okay.
that they left behind. And so all these affiliates scattered to the wind. They created a lot more groups, smaller. Some of them were closed off. So what you're seeing across the ecosystem right now is some smaller groups who are trying to figure out, like, how do you stay a little more closed, but then also get the benefits of an as a service model, right? How you get the benefits of being able to contract out and get the best of breed. They haven't quite figured that out yet.
Okay.
To the same level at which a LockBit or an Alfie had. You also see a lot of tension across all of them. So infighting among the groups,
Okay.
Trying to say they're taking over certain groups or highlighting, bad work on the other side of groups. So when you're looking across the leaders is the wrong word, right? Like the biggest, it's been changing from quarter to quarter. So I'm hesitant to like name names, but I think what you're seeing right now just is this desire to try to fill the vacuum that they all saw that still isn't, nothing's as big as LockBit or Alfie.
So I'm wondering, are you still seeing the same sort of fragmentation when it comes to the different services? Like I can remember hearing about how things were getting so fragmented, not amongst the biggest, but among groups that were like, they didn't do everything in a kill chain where it was like, oh, if there was InfoStealer malware, we'll go out and sell that. And then there was the InfoStealer developers or they're like access brokers. There's that part of it as well. So I'm wondering, does that still exist or has some of that been brought in-house in those sort of closed networks that you're talking about there?
So some of it's brought in-house, some of it's bought. Across the ecosystem, you can still buy a lot of these capabilities, initial access, tools, etc.
So are any of these unique tactics or tools that these new groups are deploying, like is there anything out there that security teams don't really have a handle on or are not aware of yet that you're seeing?
Yes. So we're seeing a lot of ransomware groups take efforts to try to blind or get around endpoint detection. And to be clear, endpoint detection is great. It works. That's why they're trying to get around it and trying to blind it. So there's various elements you can do with that. One way we really see these actors getting onto systems is something we call bring your own vulnerable driver. It's a signed Windows driver where it may have a vulnerability within it. But because it's a signed driver, you're able to get into the kernel and at that point,
the EDR doesn't recognize
at that
it,
point, at that point, get around it or change rules, etc.
Right.
So we're seeing a lot more of that, which means you really have to be able to identify behaviors on a network, not just signatures.
So for organizations that are frequently targeted, particularly industry-wide, what early warning signs might indicate that they're on a group's radar?
Looking for spoofed domains in your name. We saw that a lot in a lot of the same naming conventions when Scattered Spider was doing some of its targeting earlier this year.
Okay.
So being able to run those regular searches. One of the best ways that we've identified being able to keep out the actors is by having phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. So not just the push text you get, right? But like beyond that, right? You need the hard tokens, you need the authenticators, something that doesn't allow them to get around it because most of these attacks are coming in as identity attacks.
So I'm wondering on the flip side of this, it seems like law enforcement has been very, very active over the past couple months, particularly with takedowns, whether they are been ransomware focused or just malware focused overall. I'm wondering, like, I'm sure you've seen a lot of the work that goes into that. So I'm wondering if you have any comment just on the state of play that we've seen. It just seems like law enforcement has had some really big wins this year. And I feel like that's given the speed at which this stuff often happens, which is slow on the law enforcement side. This has been a pretty fruitful year for the defenders.
I think you're exactly right. And I would say a fruitful 2 years.
Okay.
And some of the evidence of that is even though attack numbers went up, it was against a lot of smaller organizations, and the ransomware actors received about 35% less in actual ransoms last year than they had in years past. That's huge. And to me, a lot of law enforcement's work in this space, it really helps stem growth.
Right.
So imagine if you hadn't had any of these operations, what would ransomware look like today? It'd be so much worse. And so I feel like I'm really proud of the work I see being done. And I think it makes a huge difference. I also think industry has a role in making a larger dent as well. And that's through defense in depth, being able to really use AI now to our benefit, figure out how to have technical solutions to stopping the ransomware actors. And that really helps aid a lot of these law enforcement efforts.
So that 35% drop, do you attribute that just to really like getting the word out there, or is it more of defenders being better, or is it a little bit of both?
It's defenders being better. It's creating a much more hardened attack surface, as well as some of those takedowns I mentioned earlier, where if you have a smaller group, you're trying to regroup, and then you're seeing large organizations have some better cybersecurity, you're going to go after smaller targets. And so it becomes a numbers game. I'm going to target the dentist office for $10,000. But
Right.
I might have previously tried to target something larger for $1 million. And so right now, time will tell what the funds look like this year. And my guess is they're going to figure out some ways around that. And it's cyclical coming back around. But last year, what we really saw is just a lot of smaller, like small game hunting instead of the big game hunting from previous years.
So back to the research center, I'm wondering just exactly where does the research really concentrate on? Like, is it more on the human side of things, or is it more in line with like looking at some new malware or some new tooling that the actors might be looking? Because there is really a human side to this. I'm always fascinated to read through when I get a chance to like ransomware negotiations, where it's like there's no malware platform that could, deal with the human element of this. So I'm wondering, what do you really concentrate on when you are researching this stuff?
I am excited about a lot of different avenues, but our initial focus is going to be creating really good baseline resources.
Okay.
So threat actor profiles, places where people can really understand ransomware. I mean, if you look at what are the common searches about ransomware out there on the internet, it's what is ransomware? Is a ransomware payment tax deductible? Is that, well, I'm not going to research that, right? But that's actually one of the
That's
bigger.
a good one. I've actually never heard that before, but
I was
that's
shocked when I saw. But I think that there's a demystifying we have to do to really get at and show the public and CEOs and boards just how strong of a threat this is. And then we're going to dive into the human elements, really interesting, the trends, the, technical trends, as I'm talking about, the bring your own vulnerable drivers, what type of malware might they be using today, as well as some of the tracking of the financial ecosystem, like that whole background behind, like building out our understanding of all the enablers is really fascinating to me, and something that not one organization can do on its own.
So going back to what you're saying there with the tax deductible part, it speaks to something that, I hear all the time, is that boards lack cybersecurity know-how. So I'm wondering, with your conversations with boards, if you had them, like, what questions do you get about ransomware that you're like, oh, that's really good? Or questions like that where it's like, oh, can I write this off if I'm paying a ransomware attacker?
Boards are going to be interested in risk, which goes to the tax conversation, or what can we do, or like what's tolerable. And I think sometimes what I see is just a lack of understanding of how bad it could be, how a ransomware actor may be able to get into backups, or what it means if they get further along, and how fast it can occur. So I know that's a few different kind of avenues, but really it's about creating an understanding of this can happen fast. If your information is exfiltrated, if it's taken, it doesn't really matter if you have backups or not, right? Like, there's already damage done. So really investing in the front end of how do you identify initial access? How do you identify the staging?
Right.
I think that's a key component that I hope a lot more leaders in organizations understand.
So I'm wondering, the fast part of it would be something, if I was a board member, if I didn't know anything about this, that has got to be something that is very striking to hear for the first time, where it's like, no, like 8 hours, you're done. Like, it's over. Probably even faster than that now at this point. Have you gotten that reaction before?
I think that people were shocked at how fast Scattered Spider could conduct their activities. And that's what we're really seeing, within 24 hours, a lot less actually, right? Being able to do this where ransomware actors in the past were doing this, of course, over the course of several days. So I think it is striking, and it does create a lot more urgency whenever we're communicating that and talking about that. But I think that's a relatively new element that we need to get the word out more on.
So I'm wondering, given that you've spent time in the public sector and now you're in the private sector, what more could the government be doing to help fight this? I know that they do a lot and they've come a long way, but I'm wondering, how can they build upon what they're already doing?
I'm really interested in exploring some of those policy options with the government, especially with Sean Cairncross, as he's just been confirmed as the National Cyber Director. I am interested in some of the niche areas that we can think about harsher penalties for ransomware actors. Like if a ransomware actor targets a hospital, how should we be treating that? And is it different?
Right.
My answer is yes. I think there's pretty significant consequences that we've talked about before. I think, we should be talking about charging felonious murder when someone dies, and what are those triggers?
I know that there have been policy questions to even categorize ransomware as terrorism in some aspects too. So I know that those discussions are happening.
If you ask Cynthia Kaiser, a ransomware attack against a hospital is terrorism.
Yeah, I mean, I can surely see the logic there. I would have to agree at that point if we're talking about loss of life.
And then I think the other element that government can do is have really refined conversations with industry about how we can help. Are there ways in which industry can do more offensive actions against sanctioned entities, for example? So people or groups that have already been identified by the U.S. government, can U.S. industry, who has just more rapid understanding of what might be going on in an attack, what the wallets are, what the infrastructure is, how can you enable us, but also put restrictions and frameworks in place so that there is a lot of structure around that and there's not unintended consequences. I think that's a conversation this administration's interested in having. And it's one we're really excited to have, too, to figure out how we can help and be more operational together.
Great. Cynthia, really appreciate your expertise on the program. We'll have to check in again soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Safe Mode, a weekly podcast on cybersecurity and digital privacy brought to you by Cyberscoop. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and a review and share it with your friends, your coworkers, your CISOs, your sysadmins, your mom, your dad, anybody that wants to know more about cybersecurity. To find out more information or to contact me, please look for all of our social media handles or visit cyberscoop.com. Thanks for listening. Check us out next week.